The front door opened and no one said hello. Daniel walked in first, eyes fixed on his phone thumb, scrolling like he was already somewhere else. I said his name once quietly. He didn't respond, not even a glance. Rachel followed behind him, talking about road conditions and weather alerts in that light, easy tone she used when everything had already been decided. Chloe stood just inside the doorway, her boots still dusted with snow, looking from one face to another, like she could feel something wasn't right. I picked up the thermos from the counter, still warm in my hands. "I packed extra," I said. "And the wool socks you like. It gets cold up there." Daniel zipped his jacket without meeting my eyes. "Yeah, that's kind of the point." Rachel adjusted her scarf, then gave me a quick smile that didn't quite land. "You know how it gets in Tahoe. Slippery roads, freezing nights." She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Daniel finished it for her. "Not really a trip for someone your age." He looked like he might add something else, then didn't. The words didn't echo. They just settled. Chloe's fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. She looked down, then back up at me like she was waiting for me to say something that would make it sound less final. I didn't, because it wasn't just what he said, it was how easily it came out. No pause, no hesitation, like this had already been discussed somewhere else, somewhere I hadn't been part of. And in that moment, I made a decision. I let it go. I just didn't realize yet how many other decisions had already been made without me. My name is Sharon Walker. I'm 61 years old and I've lived in the same house in Naperville for nearly 30 years. I raised my son here. Every winter, every holiday, every ordinary day that somehow turns into something bigger when you look back on it. The driveway out front still holds the faint lines from where he used to shovel snow before I even asked. Back then, he'd look up at the house like it belonged to him, too. That morning, I'd been up before sunrise. Coffee brewed. Breakfast set out. I even checked the weather twice just to make sure they wouldn't run into anything unexpected. It wasn't a long trip. Just a few days at a cabin near Lake Tahoe. That's what they'd told me. I hadn't asked to go, but I hadn't expected to be left out either. Rachel moved through the kitchen like she knew exactly where everything was, opening the fridge, closing it again, scanning the counters. "We brought a few things for you," she said, setting a bag down, "just so you don't have to worry about meals while we're gone." Inside were neatly labeled containers. Instructions written in black marker. Heat for 5 minutes. Stir halfway. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. At least part of me did. Another part of me noticed how everything had already been arranged, what I would eat, how long I'd be alone, what I would and wouldn't need. As if my absence from their trip came with its own set of instructions. If you're listening right now, where are you watching from? And has anyone ever made a decision about your place in their life without even asking you? Daniel checked his watch. "We should head out." Chloe walked over and wrapped her arms around me. "I'll miss you, Grandma." I bent down, holding her a little longer than I meant to. Her hair smelled like something sweet and familiar, something that didn't belong to this moment. "I'll miss you too, sweetheart." She pulled back slightly. "You don't like the cold, right?" I smiled, softening my voice for her. "I've been through colder than this." She laughed, not really understanding. That was okay. She didn't need to. Rachel called from the hallway. "Chloe, shoes. We're leaving." Daniel was already outside by then. I could hear the engine running steady and impatient. He didn't come back in. I stayed in the kitchen for a second longer, my hand resting against the edge of the counter, feeling the fading warmth from the coffee I hadn't touched. Something about the room felt off, not empty, just adjusted. Like a space that had quietly shifted to fit a version of the day where I wasn't going anywhere. Rachel grabbed her coat and paused just long enough to offer another quick smile. "We'll check in when we get there." "Of course," I said. Chloe waved as she stepped out, her mitten tapping lightly against the glass of the door. I followed them to the doorway, stopping just at the frame, watching as they moved toward the car. Daniel opened the passenger door for Rachel. Chloe climbed into the back seat. No one looked back. And for the first time standing there in the doorway, I had the quiet, unsettling feeling that this wasn't just a trip I wasn't invited to. The sound of the car faded, slowly swallowed by the quiet of the street. I stayed by the door a moment longer than I needed to, my hand still resting against the frame. For a second, I almost expected to hear footsteps coming back up the driveway. A quick knock. Daniel forgetting something. Chloe running back in for a hug she'd missed. Nothing. The driveway emptied. The engine noise disappeared. The house settled into itself. I closed the door. The latch clicked soft, ordinary, but it carried through the hallway in a way that made it feel final. For a few seconds, I didn't move. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because there was suddenly no one waiting for me to do anything. Then I turned back toward the kitchen. The coffee sat where I'd left it, steam gone. The plates I'd set out that morning looked untouched, like they'd been prepared for a moment that never arrived. I picked one up, rinsed it, and set it in the rack. One plate, one cup. I cleared the rest just as quietly. Rachel's bag was still on the counter. I opened one of the containers. Lasagna, neatly portioned, carefully labeled, heat for 5 minutes. I stared at the handwriting for a second longer than I should have, then closed the lid without taking any out. Instead, I wiped down the counter. Then the stove. Then the cabinet handles, even though they didn't need it. I reached under the sink, pulled out the small brush, and started scrubbing the grout between the tiles. Harder than necessary. There's a kind of cleaning that fills time. And then there's the kind that fills something else. I didn't stop when the kitchen was done. The living room came next. I straightened the cushions, smoothing them down even though no one had sat there, adjusted the throw blanket that still held the faint crease from where Chloe had curled up the last time they visited. A crayon lay under the coffee table. I bent down, picked it up, turning it between my fingers. The paper was peeled slightly at the edge, worn from use. Chloe always pressed too hard when she colored. I held it a second longer than I meant to. Then I opened the drawer and placed it inside. I didn't close it right away. For a moment, I just looked at the empty space inside, the way it seemed to hold room for things that weren't there anymore. Somewhere along the way, this house had stopped being something we shared. I shut the drawer. Upstairs, the hallway light buzzed faintly the same way it had for months. I'd asked Daniel to look at it more than once. He'd always said he would. After the holidays, there was always an after with him. A later. A better time. I flipped the switch off. The sound disappeared, leaving the hallway quieter than before. In the guest room, their room, I opened the closet. Rachel's jacket still hung there, zipped up like she'd meant to come back for it. Chloe's coloring book sat on the nightstand, a crayon tucked into the spine. I picked it up, flipping through the pages. Half-finished drawings. Bright colors that stopped at uneven edges like she'd been called away before she could finish. Chloe's shoes. We're leaving. The echo of it came back so clearly, I almost turned around. I set the book back exactly where I'd found it. Then I stepped out of the room. The first part of the day passed like that. One small task leading into another. No plan, just movement. Enough to keep the quiet from settling too heavily. At some point I realized I hadn't turned on the television, or the radio, or anything at all. I didn't reach for them. Instead, I found myself standing by the living room window, watching the snow gather along the hedges. It fell lightly at first, then steadier, covering the yard in a thin, even layer, the kind that looks soft until you step into it. I checked the clock. Just after 3. They would have been on the road for hours by now, maybe already there, unpacking, settling in, starting whatever version of the trip they had planned. I glanced at my phone on the side table. No messages. That wasn't unusual. Daniel had never been one to check in unless there was a reason. And Rachel always had something else going on. Still, I picked up the phone. Waited. Nothing. I set it down. Then after a moment I picked it up again just to make sure I hadn't missed something. The screen stayed the same. No missed calls. No texts. That was the moment I realized something wasn't just off. It was being left out. I held it there a second longer this time before placing it back down slower, more carefully, as if the way I let go of it might change what it showed me the next time I looked. By early evening, the light outside shifted into that dull gray blue that comes just before night settles in. I reheated one of the casseroles more out of habit than hunger. The microwave hummed quietly, counting down seconds that stretched longer than they should have. When it finished, I carried the dish to the table and sat down. The first bite was too hot. The second was better. By the third, I realized I wasn't really tasting anything. I kept eating anyway. I didn't even remember finishing it. Afterward, I rinsed the plate, dried it, and put it away. The routine felt smaller now contained. Everything scaled down to fit just one person. Later, I tried reading. The book sat open in my lap, the same page in front of me, for longer than it should have been. The words didn't stay. They moved past without settling into anything. I closed it. The house held its quiet around me, not heavy exactly, but present. Every small sound stood out. The shift of the floor beneath my feet, the low hum of the heater turning on and off, the faint rattle somewhere in the pipes. I walked through the rooms again, slower this time, not cleaning, just noticing the space they had taken up, the space they had left behind. When I reached the kitchen again, my phone was still where I'd left it. Dark, silent. I stood there for a moment looking at it, then turned away. It was only the first day. There was still time for them to call. That's what I told myself. But somewhere underneath that thought, quieter and harder to ignore, was something else beginning to take shape. The next morning didn't feel as quiet as it should have, not because anything had changed, but because something from the night before hadn't quite settled. It stayed there just under the surface, like a thought that hadn't finished forming. I moved through the same routine anyway. Coffee, a glance out the window, the same pale light over the snow that hadn't melted. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. I reached for my phone before I'd finished pouring my coffee, half expecting something to be there. A message sent late. A quick, "We made it." Even just a photo. There was nothing. I set the phone down, then picked it up again without thinking, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. The screen didn't change. It was still early, I told myself. They might have arrived late. Maybe they were still sleeping. That made sense. I let that explanation sit there a little longer than it deserved. After breakfast, I moved through the house again, slower this time, straightening things that didn't need it, adjusting a chair, folding a dish towel with more care than usual. It didn't take long before I ran out of things to fix. The quiet came back. I picked up my phone again, opened my messages. Still nothing. For a moment, I typed out a message. "Did you get there okay?" My thumb hovered over the send button, then stopped. If they were busy, I didn't want to interrupt. If they weren't, I didn't want to be the one reaching first. I erased the message. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed in my hand. It was small, just a vibration, but it cut through everything. I looked down. Chloe. A video call. I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." The screen shifted before her face appeared a little too close to the camera. Her hair looked wind-tousled, her cheeks flushed not from cold, but from something else. Behind her, the light was different. Brighter. Warmer. It didn't match the morning outside my window. "Grandma," she said, smiling wide. "Look." The camera tilted suddenly. For a second, it was just color blue-white movement. Then it steadied. The light hit first too bright, almost white, like the screen couldn't hold it properly. Sunlight spilled across the water in sharp reflections, shifting with every small movement. There was sound, too. Waves not loud but constant. Voices in the background, people talking, laughing, the kind of noise that comes from a place already in motion. I didn't recognize it right away, not because I didn't know what it was, but because it didn't belong anywhere near where I was standing. I held the phone a little tighter, just enough to steady it. For a second I thought the connection had glitched, but it hadn't. Water. Not the still kind. Bright, moving, endless. I blinked once. "That's the ocean," Chloe said, as if I might not recognize it. "We're at the beach." The words didn't land right away. I waited for something to correct them. "For the day?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "No," she laughed. "We're staying here. Mommy said it's Hawaii. We're in Maui. Not really a trip for someone your age." Maui. The word settled differently. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a misunderstanding and started feeling intentional. In my mind, something shifted quietly but completely. The cabin, the cold, the way Daniel had said it. Not really a trip for someone your age. I held onto the phone a little tighter. "You're in Hawaii," I said. "Yeah." Chloe turned the camera again, showing more of it. A pool, palm trees, sunlight that seemed too bright to be real. Daddy said we can go snorkeling later. I could hear voices behind her laughter music, the low hum of people enjoying something that had already begun. Not a cabin, not snow, not Tahoe. I smiled, or something close enough to it. That looks beautiful, I said. It is. She leaned closer again. Mommy got a big room with a balcony. I can see everything from up there. In the background, I heard Rachel's voice. Chloe, careful with the phone. I'm showing Grandma. There was a brief pause, then the phone shifted. Rachel appeared on screen, sunglasses pushed into her hair, sunlight catching along the edges of her face. Hey, she said like this was normal. We just got in yesterday. It was a bit of a long flight. A flight? I let that word sit there. You're in Hawaii, I repeated. She smiled, but it didn't quite settle. She adjusted her sunglasses even though they didn't need adjusting. Yeah. We decided kind of last minute. There was a deal and it just made more sense than Tahoe. That wasn't the first time something had been decided for me without being said out loud. Her tone stayed light, but her eyes flicked slightly off camera just for a second. More sense. I nodded once. I see. We were going to tell you, she added quickly, but everything got busy with packing and flights, and it's fine, I said. She stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled again, softer this time, like she was smoothing something over. We'll send pictures. I'd like that. She handed the phone back to Chloe, who waved excitedly. I'll show you the fish later, I'd love that. Bye, Grandma. The screen went dark. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, the reflection of my own face faint against the black screen. Hawaii, a deal, a last-minute decision. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The snow was still there, covering the yard in that same thin layer untouched. Cold. Too cold. Not for someone my age. I let out a quiet breath. This hadn't been a change of plans. This had been a different plan. One I had never been part of. I stayed there for a while, looking out at the yard, letting the pieces settle into something that made sense. Then I turned back toward the kitchen. My phone sat on the counter where I'd left it. I looked at it for a second longer than I needed to. Then I looked at it again. Not to call, just to look. I stood in the kitchen a little longer than I needed to, the phone still in my hand. The screen had gone dark again, but the images hadn't. Sunlight, water, palm trees, a place they had chosen without me. I set the phone down slowly, then reached for the edge of the counter, grounding myself in something solid. For a moment, I told myself it didn't matter. People change plans. Things happen quickly. Deals come up. That's what Rachel had said. That's what I almost let myself believe. But something about the way she'd said it, too quick, too ready, didn't sit right. And then there was the other part. The part I hadn't looked at yet. I turned back toward the counter and picked up my phone again. Not to call. Just to check. I opened the banking app the way I always did without thinking. A habit. A routine. The numbers loaded slowly. For a second, everything looked the same. Then my eyes caught something that didn't belong. A transaction. Large enough to stand out. I tapped on it. Airline charges. More than one. I scrolled. Hotel. Resort booking. Activity packages. The list kept going. Each one tied to a date I recognized. Yesterday, the day before. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the phone. I didn't rush. I read each line again. Chicago to Maui. 3 tickets. The total sat at the bottom of the screen, clear and precise. $25,600. It was more than I'd spent on myself in years. For a moment, the number didn't register as real. It just existed there, separate from everything else. Then it settled, and with it, everything else started to line up. The flight, the last-minute decision, the way Daniel hadn't looked at me, the way Rachel had already prepared everything I would need while they were gone. Not a cabin, not Tahoe, never Tahoe. I exhaled slowly, setting the phone down on the counter in front of me. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just clear. Clear in a way that made everything quieter. I picked the phone up again and scrolled further, checking the rest of the account. More charges, meals, transportation, deposits. All of it tied together into something that wasn't a mistake. This wasn't one charge. It was a plan. He'd handled things before, bills, appointments, small decisions I didn't question. This just went further. I locked the screen and stood there for a second, letting the silence settle around it. Then I unlocked it again and dialed the number for the bank. The line rang twice before someone picked up. "Thank you for calling Chase. My name is Ethan. How can I assist you today?" "My name is Sharon Walker," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need to review some recent charges on my account." "Of course, Ms. Walker, I'd be happy to help with that. Can you verify your identity for me?" I answered the questions automatically. Address, last 4 digits, security prompt. "Thank you," he said. "What charges are you referring to?" "There are several transactions from the past 48 hours, I said. "Airline tickets, a resort booking. I'd like to confirm those." There was a brief pause as he pulled them up. "Yes, I see those here," he said. "Flights from Chicago to Maui, a hotel reservation, and a few associated expenses, all authorized on your card." Authorized. The word landed differently. "I didn't make those purchases," I said. Another pause. "Do you have any authorized users on the account?" he asked carefully. "Yes," I said. "My son." "And has he had access to the card recently?" "Yes." "Then it's possible the charges were made by an authorized user," he said. "In that case, they wouldn't be considered fraudulent." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I understand," I said. But I didn't approve this use. There was a slight shift in his tone. More attentive now. "Would you like to place a temporary hold on the card while we look into it?" I looked back at the screen at the total still sitting there. $25,600. "No," I said after a second. "I'd like to cancel the card." "Cancel it entirely?" "Yes." "And issue a new one?" "Yes." "All right, I can do that for you. That will immediately deactivate the current card and prevent any further transactions." "That's fine." He paused. "Before I proceed, I just want to confirm this will also prevent any pending charges from going through." "That's fine," I repeated. There was a brief silence on the line, then the sound of keys typing. "All right," he said. "The card has been deactivated. A new one will be mailed to your address within 5 to 7 business days. Thank you. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then I said, "No, that's all. Thank you for calling Chase, Ms. Walker. Have a good day." The line clicked off. I lowered the phone slowly and set it back on the counter. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same as it had before. This quiet wasn't empty. It was settled, like something had shifted into place. I stood there for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Then I turned slightly, my gaze drifting across the kitchen, the counter, the sink, the bag of neatly labeled meals still sitting where Rachel had left it. Heat for 5 minutes. I reached out and slid one of the containers aside, clearing a small space on the counter. Not to use it, just to move it, just to make room for what came next. I stood there a moment after ending the call, the quiet settling differently now. Not empty, organized, like something had been moved into place even if I couldn't see all of it yet. The container Rachel had left sat open on the counter, its label still facing me. I slid it farther back without thinking, clearing space that didn't need clearing. Then I picked up my phone again. This time I didn't open the banking app. I went to my email. There were the usual things, promotions, reminders, a few newsletters I hadn't read in weeks. Nothing urgent, nothing out of place. Until I searched his name. Daniel. The results came up faster than I expected. Threads from months ago, notifications, confirmations, things I'd skimmed over at the time because they hadn't seemed important. Now they did. I opened one at random. Account activity, another. Authorization update. My fingers slowed as I scrolled. There it was. A document attachment from a few years back. One I vaguely remembered signing somewhere between hospital paperwork and insurance forms when everything had felt rushed and temporary. I tapped it open. Financial power of attorney. The words were clear, formal, clinical. I read the first paragraph, then the next. My name. Daniel's name. Authority granted to act on my behalf in financial matters. Accounts, transactions, decisions. I didn't rush through it this time. I read it carefully. Every line. There were limits, of course. Language about acting in my best interest, about managing finances responsibly. But there was also space. Enough space for interpretation. Enough space for someone to decide what best interest meant. I lowered the phone slightly, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't a stranger using my card. This wasn't even unauthorized. Not technically. This was something I had signed. Something I had trusted. Back then, it felt like trust. Now it felt like access. If that document was still active, this wasn't just about a trip anymore. It meant he could do more and maybe already had. I closed the document and stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary. Then I opened the banking app again. The numbers were still there. The charges hadn't changed, $25,600. But they looked different now. Not like a mistake. Not like a one-time decision. Like access. Like permission that had been used. Differently than I had intended. I exhaled slowly. There was no point going back to the call I'd just had. The card was already canceled. That part was done. But the access wasn't. Not yet. I moved to the small desk in the corner of the living room and sat down. The chair creaked slightly under me, the sound sharper than it used to be. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up, reflecting faintly in the window behind it. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands resting on the keyboard. Then I began. Passwords first. The main account, the savings account, the credit lines. Each one I changed carefully, deliberately. No rush, no second guessing. Old habits replaced with new ones. Words I wouldn't forget. Patterns no one else would know. I updated the recovery email, removed Daniel's secondary access where it appeared, checked each setting twice before moving on. There was a rhythm to it. Click, confirm, save, again, click, confirm, save. With each change, something tightened, not in a painful way, but in a way that felt more contained, more mine. At one point, I paused, my hand hovering over the trackpad. There was a section labeled Authorized Users. I didn't remember the last time I had checked it. His name was still there, Daniel Walker. I stared at it for a second. Then I clicked. The system asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to remove this user? Yes. I didn't hesitate. The page refreshed. His name disappeared. The space where it had been felt larger than it should have. I sat back slightly in the chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For a moment, I thought about calling him, not to argue, just to ask, to hear what he would say. But I already knew, or at least I knew enough. He hadn't hidden it, not really. He just counted on me not looking. On me trusting that everything being done was being done the right way. And for a long time it had been. Hospital bills, unexpected expenses, things that made sense, things I had agreed to even when I hadn't said it out loud. This wasn't that. I closed the laptop halfway, then opened it again. There were still a few accounts left, smaller ones, subscriptions, automatic payments. I went through each of them, updating information, removing connections, tightening anything that felt too open. No rush, just thorough. By the time I finished, the light outside had shifted again, the afternoon settling into something quieter. I closed the laptop fully this time and rested my hands on top of it. The house felt the same, but I didn't. Not exactly. I stood up and walked back into the kitchen. The counter was clearer now, the containers pushed aside, the space more open than it had been that morning. I looked at the phone again. No calls, no messages. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I turned slightly, my gaze moving toward the hallway, toward the part of the house where the old filing cabinet sat, where paperwork had a way of collecting over the years. There were still things I hadn't looked at. Not yet. And for the first time since the call, I felt something shift again. Not confusion. Not hesitation, something more focused, something quieter, like the next step had already been there waiting. I just hadn't walked toward it yet. The hallway felt longer than it used to, not because anything had changed, but because I was walking it differently now, slower, more deliberate, like I knew exactly where I was going, even if I hadn't said it out loud yet. The filing cabinet sat at the end, tucked against the wall beside the small desk I rarely used anymore. It had been there for years. Bills, insurance papers, old warranties, things I'd kept because I might need them one day. I opened the top drawer, folders lined up neatly labeled in my handwriting: mortgage, utilities, medical, taxes. I moved past them until I found the one I was looking for: legal. The tab was slightly worn, the edge bent from being handled more than the others. I pulled it out and carried it back to the desk, setting it down carefully before opening it. Inside were copies, wills, insurance documents, and there, clipped neatly to the front, was the same document I had seen on my phone: financial power of attorney. I sat down. This time I read it on paper. Slower. The language felt heavier here, more permanent. The kind of words you don't question when you sign them because they're surrounded by urgency, by trust, by the assumption that everything being done is for protection. I remembered the day I'd signed it. A hospital room. Bright lights. Too many forms at once. Daniel standing beside me, calm, reassuring. "It's just in case, Mom, so I can help if you need it." I hadn't hesitated. I signed where they told me to sign. Now I traced the signature lightly with my finger as if it belonged to someone else. The document gave him authority, not ownership, not freedom to decide based on convenience, authority to act in my best interest. I closed the folder. There was no anger in the motion, just clarity. I reached for my phone again and dialed the bank this time, asking to speak with someone who could review the account at a higher level. It took a few minutes. A transfer, a brief hold. Then another voice came on the line. "Ms. Walker, this is Thomas Green, branch manager at the Naperville office. I understand you have some concerns about recent activity." "Yes," I said, "and about access." "Of course. How can I help? I have a financial power of attorney in place for my son," I said. "I need to revoke it." There was a pause, not surprised, just attentive. "All right," he said. "We can assist with that. Do you have a copy of the document?" "Yes." "Good. You'll need to come into the branch to complete a revocation form and have it notarized. Once that's done, we can remove his authority from all associated accounts. How soon can that be done? Today, if you're able to come in." "I can. Then we'll have everything ready for you. Just bring identification and the document." "I will." We ended the call. I didn't sit there long after that. I gathered the folder, my keys, my coat. The motions were simple, familiar. But there was something different in the way I moved through them, no hesitation, no second guessing. The drive to the bank felt shorter than usual. The roads were clear, the snow from the day before already pushed to the sides, leaving the asphalt bare and dark. Traffic moved steadily, nothing unusual, nothing that demanded attention beyond what was directly in front of me. Inside the branch, it was quiet. A few people waiting, a teller speaking softly to someone at the counter. Thomas Green met me near his office, extending a hand. "Ms. Walker, thank you for seeing me." "Of course." We sat down across from each other, the folder resting between us. I opened it and slid the document toward him. "This is the one," I said. He read through it quickly, his eyes moving with practiced familiarity. "All right," he said after a moment. "This grants your son broad financial authority, but you're well within your rights to revoke it." "I understand." He turned the document slightly and reached for another form. "This will officially terminate the power of attorney. Once it's signed and notarized, we'll update your accounts immediately." He placed the pen in front of me. For a second I looked at it, not because I was unsure, just because I was aware of what it meant. Then I picked it up and signed. The notary came in shortly after. A brief verification, a stamp, a signature. Simple, efficient, final. Thomas took the completed document and made a copy. "I'll have this processed right away," he said. "Your son will no longer have access to your accounts moving forward." "Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to review while you're here?" I paused for a moment. Then I said yes. I'd like to go over my accounts, and I'll need a referral for an estate attorney. He nodded. Of course. The rest of the meeting moved quickly. We reviewed the accounts one by one, confirmed the changes I had already made, added additional safeguards, alerts, restrictions. Everything tightened. Everything clearer. Before I left, he handed me a card. Olivia Carter, he said. She's a local estate attorney, very thorough. If you're considering changes to your will or trust, she's someone I'd recommend. I took the card and slipped it into my folder. Thank you. When I stepped back outside, the air felt colder than it had earlier, sharper. But it didn't bother me. I got into the car and sat there for a moment, the folder resting on the passenger seat beside me. The document inside had changed. Or maybe it was just the way I saw it now. Either way, it no longer held the same weight. I started the engine and drove home. The house looked the same when I pulled into the driveway. Unchanged. Familiar. But as I stepped inside, setting my keys down on the counter, there was a quiet sense that something important had already been put back where it belonged, and that whatever came next, I would be ready for it. The call came that evening. Not long after I'd set the folder down and slipped Olivia Carter's card onto the small desk by the wall. I hadn't touched it again. Not yet. The house had settled into its usual rhythm, the soft hum of the heater, the occasional creak in the floorboards. I was in the kitchen rinsing a glass when my phone lit up on the counter. Daniel. I didn't reach for it right away. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, I turned off the tap, dried my hands slowly on a towel, and then picked it up. "Hello, Mom." His voice came through, tight, controlled, like he was trying to keep it that way. "Did you cancel your card?" I didn't answer immediately. I leaned back slightly against the counter, letting the question settle in the space between us. "Yes," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Why would you do that?" He asked, the control slipping just a little. "We're in the middle of... things are already booked. The hotel, the activities, my card just got declined at the front desk." I glanced toward the window without really seeing anything. "I needed to make some changes," I said. "Changes," he repeated. "Mom, you could have told me first. We're here. This isn't something you just..." He exhaled sharply. "Rachel had to cover it, and now we're trying to figure out what's going on." I let him speak. Didn't interrupt. Didn't fill the silence when it came. Because there was something in his voice I recognized, not concern, not confusion. Inconvenience. "I saw the charges," I said. Another pause, this one longer. "They were already taken care of," he said, quieter now. "I was going to explain when we got back." "When you got back," I repeated. "Yeah," he said. "It wasn't a big deal. There was a deal on flights and Tahoe didn't make sense anymore, so we switched it. I used the card because it was easier. I figured," he stopped himself. "You figured," I said gently, "that it wouldn't matter." He finished a little defensively. It's not like I haven't handled things before. You gave me access for a reason." I looked down at the counter, tracing the edge of it lightly with my finger. "I did," I said. "So I don't understand why you'd shut everything down like that," he went on. "We're here now. This just makes things harder for everyone. Harder." I let that word sit there. For everyone. He said it like I was included. Like I'd been part of the decision. "I understand," I said. There was a shift on the line, subtle but there. He hadn't expected that. "Then can you just reactivate it?" he asked. "Or at least until we're back, we can sort everything out then." I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. "No," I said. The silence that followed was different, sharper. "Mom," he said, slower now. "This isn't necessary." "I think it is." For what, his voice edged closer to frustration. "It's just a trip. We didn't think you'd want to go and things changed, so we adjusted. That's all." I leaned back against the counter again, my gaze drifting to the folder resting on the desk across the room. "That's not all I said." "What do you mean you didn't tell me?" I said, still calm. "You made a decision, used my account, and planned to explain it later." He let out a short breath. "Because it wasn't a big deal. It was to me." Another pause. This time I could hear something else underneath it. Not quite anger, not quite understanding, just resistance. "I was going to take care of it," he said, "like I always do." I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see it. "I know," I said. "And I have," he added. "Hospital bills, things around the house, I know," I repeated. "And this is different," how he asked. I didn't raise my voice, didn't rush. "It just is," I said. That seemed to land harder than anything else I'd said. There was a quiet stretch on the line. I could hear faint movement in the background voices, maybe Rachel saying something I couldn't quite make out. Then Daniel spoke again. "So what are we supposed to do now?" he asked. "Just figure it out." "Yes." Another pause. "That's it," he said. "That's it." He let out a breath longer this time. "All right," he said finally. "We'll handle it." "I'm sure you will." The words came out evenly, not sharp, not cold, just steady. There was nothing left to say after that. "Okay," he added, quieter now. "We'll talk when we get back." "If you'd like," I said. The call ended a second later. That was the first time he had to react to me, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I lowered the phone slowly and set it back on the counter. For a moment I didn't move, not replaying the conversation, not questioning it, just standing. The house was quiet again, but it didn't press in the same way it had before. Something had shifted, not outside. Inside. I reached for the towel again, folding it neatly before placing it back where it belonged. The movement was small, familiar, but it felt different now, more deliberate, more contained. For the first time since they had left, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. Not for a call, not for an explanation, not for things to return to how they had been. I glanced toward the desk again, where the folder still sat untouched since I'd come home. Everything that needed to be done was already in motion. There was nothing left to react to, only what came next. And for once, that didn't feel uncertain. They came back 3 days earlier than planned. I knew before they even pulled into the driveway. The sound of the car was different this time, faster, sharper, like something unfinished had followed them all the way home. I was in the living room when I heard it, standing near the window, where I had spent more time than I realized over the past few days. I didn't move right away. I just watched as the car stopped, as the doors opened in quick succession. Daniel stepped out first. Rachel followed her movements, tighter than usual. Chloe climbed out last, slower, looking around like she wasn't sure what kind of return this was supposed to be. No one waved. That was new. I turned from the window and walked toward the front door, stopping just as the handle began to turn. They didn't knock. Of course they didn't. Daniel pushed the door open, stepping inside like he always had, like nothing had changed. But everything had. "Mom?" he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Rachel stayed a step behind him, her expression carefully neutral. Chloe hovered near the doorway, her small hand gripping the strap of her backpack again the same way she had the day they left. I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence settle. Then I nodded once. "You're back early." "We needed to come home," Daniel said quickly. "The card situation, I know," I said. That stopped him for a moment. Rachel shifted slightly, crossing her arms. "It made things complicated," she said, her tone light but edged. "We had to rearrange a few things. I imagine you did." Another pause. The space between us felt different now, not strained, not loud, just clear. Like everything that needed to be seen was already out in the open. Daniel stepped forward a little. "Look, I think this has gotten bigger than it needed to be. We can talk through it, figure out what makes sense. We can," I said. He seemed relieved for a second. Then I continued, "But not like this." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I said, my voice steady. "We're not moving past it as if nothing happened." Rachel let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "No one said that. You didn't have to." Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. "Mom, we made a decision. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't meant to hurt you." "It didn't need to be perfect," I said. "It needed to be honest." He hesitated. "That's what this is about?" Rachel asked, her voice tightening. "We didn't tell you every detail. You didn't tell me anything I said." The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Daniel rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "We were going to. It just timing got off." "The timing didn't get off," I said. "The plan changed, and you chose not to include me in it." "That's not fair," Rachel said quickly. "We didn't think you'd want to go." "I didn't say I did," I replied. "Then what's the issue?" I looked at her for a moment. Then back at Daniel. "You used my account," I said. "You made a decision that involved me without asking me and assumed it wouldn't matter." Daniel exhaled frustration, surfacing more clearly now. I didn't assume that. I just knew it wasn't a big deal. I've handled things before. You trusted me. I did. And I didn't misuse that, he said. This was just different. Yes, I said. It was. There was a shift in the room then, not loud, but unmistakable. Chloe glanced between us, her grip tightening slightly on her bag. Rachel looked away for a second, her jaw set. Daniel's expression hardened just enough to show he wasn't going to back down. So what do you want, Mom? He asked. An apology. Because if that's what this isn't about an apology, I said. Then what is it about? I held his gaze. Respect. The word hung there, simple and clear. Rachel shook her head slightly. We're not disrespecting you. This is being blown out of proportion. No, I said. It's being seen for what it is. Daniel stepped forward again. Okay. Then tell me what you want us to do now. I didn't hesitate. I want you to leave. I reached for the back of the chair and straightened it. The room went still. For a second, no one reacted. Then Rachel let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're serious? Yes. Daniel blinked once like he hadn't heard me correctly. You want us to leave after we just got back? Yes. For how long, I don't know. That doesn't make sense, he said, his voice rising slightly. This is our home too. He said it the same way he used to say, I'll take care of it. I shook my head. No, I said calmly. It isn't. The words landed harder than anything else I had said. Chloe looked up at Daniel, confused. Rachel's expression shifted, the neutrality gone, now replaced with something sharper. We live here, she said. Our things are here. You stay here, I said. There's a difference. Daniel stared at me for a second, searching for something, uncertainty maybe, or hesitation. He didn't find it. You're overreacting, he said quietly. I'm not reacting, I replied. I'm deciding. Another silence. This one longer. He exhaled slowly, then nodded once like he was conceding something he didn't agree with. Fine, he said. We'll go, for now. Rachel grabbed her bag, her movements quicker now, more rigid. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. Chloe lingered for a second longer, looking at me. Grandma? I stepped toward her, softening slightly. It's okay, sweetheart. She hesitated, then nodded, following her parents toward the door. Daniel paused at the threshold, his hand on the handle. We'll talk about this later, he said. Maybe, I replied. He opened the door. Cold air slipped in again, just like it had the morning they left. But this time, I didn't step back. I stood where I was and watched as they walked out. The door closed behind them with a quiet final click. And the house stayed exactly the way I wanted it to be. The house felt different after they left. Not quieter, clearer. I stood in the living room for a moment, listening to the absence of footsteps, the absence of voices, the absence of something I hadn't realized I'd been adjusting myself around for years. Then I turned and walked toward the hallway. There was still work to do. The filing cabinet was where I'd left it, the drawer slightly open from earlier. I pulled it the rest of the way and slid the legal folder out again, placing it on the desk. For a few seconds, I just looked at it. Then I opened it. The power of attorney revocation sat neatly on top, stamped and signed. Final. Beneath it were older documents, copies of my will insurance forms, property records I hadn't reviewed in years. I flipped through them slowly, page after page of things that had been decided once and then left alone as if time would take care of the rest. It doesn't. One document thinner than the others caught slightly as I turned the page. I paused, then pulled it free. It wasn't part of the original set. The paper was newer, the edges still crisp. I unfolded it carefully. Quitclaim deed. The words stood out immediately. My name, and beneath it, Daniel's. I read it once, then again. The language was straightforward. Transfer of interest, property rights, legal phrasing that didn't need embellishment to mean exactly what it said. It wasn't signed, not fully executed, but it had been prepared, ready. I sat down slowly. For a moment I didn't move. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. This hadn't started with the trip. It had just been the first time I stopped ignoring it. The trip had just been easier to see. I placed the document flat on the desk, smoothing it with my hand. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A direction. Something that had been moving forward quietly, piece by piece, without ever being said out loud. I didn't feel angry. Not in the way I might have expected. Just certain. I folded the paper again more carefully this time and set it aside from the rest of the documents. Then I reached for my phone. The card Thomas had given me was still where I'd placed it earlier. Olivia Carter. I dialed the number. Her office answered on the second ring. Carter and Bell Legal Group. My name is Sharon Walker, I said. I was referred by Thomas Green at Chase. I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding my estate and property. There was a brief pause as the receptionist typed. Of course, Ms. Walker. We have availability this afternoon if that works for you. It does. An hour later, I was sitting across from Olivia Carter in a quiet office with large windows that let in more light than the rest of my house had that week. She listened. That was the first thing I noticed. She didn't interrupt. Didn't rush ahead. Just let me explain what I'd signed, what I'd found, what had changed. When I finished, she nodded once, folding her hands neatly on the desk. You've already taken the most important first step, she said. Revoking the power of attorney limits any further authority your son has over your finances and the property I asked. She glanced at the document I'd brought with me. This, she said, tapping the quitclaim deed lightly, was prepared, but not completed. Without your signature and proper filing, it has no legal effect, so nothing has been transferred. No, she said, but the intent is clear. I nodded. And I'd like to keep it that way, I said. Then we'll make that explicit, she replied. We went through the details one by one. My home, my accounts. The existing will I hadn't updated in years. There are a few options, she explained, but given your concerns, I would recommend placing the property into an irrevocable trust. I listened carefully. A trust gives you control over how the asset is managed and distributed, she continued. It also protects it from being reassigned without your consent in the future. And my granddaughter, I asked. She smiled slightly. We can structure the trust to benefit her directly with conditions you define. Conditions, timeframes, access. Things I hadn't considered before because I hadn't thought I needed to. I'd like that, I said. We spent the next hour outlining it. Clear. Specific. Nothing left open to interpretation. By the time I left her office, the sky had shifted again, the light softer, now fading toward evening. But I didn't feel the same way I had the day before. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, just movement. Forward. When I got home, the house greeted me the same way it always had, quiet, still familiar. But now everything inside it felt anchored, defined. I set my keys down and moved toward the kitchen, pausing when I saw something on the counter. A small envelope, plain, unmarked except for my name written carefully across the front. I picked it up, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Chloe. I opened it gently. Inside was a folded piece of paper and something small wrapped in tissue. I unfolded the paper first. Crayon lines, bright colors, a drawing of a house with 3 stick figures in front of it and one slightly off to the side holding a small circle that might have been a flower. At the top, in uneven letters, I miss you, Grandma. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the page. I set it down carefully and unwrapped the tissue. A bracelet. Simple. Handmade. Thin string woven together with small beads in different colors. One of Chloe's. I held it in my palm for a moment, the colors catching the light. Then I slipped it gently over my wrist. Loving her didn't change anything. It just made it clearer what needed to stay and what couldn't. It fit loosely, but it stayed. I looked back at the drawing, then around the kitchen, the same space that had felt too quiet just a few days ago. It didn't feel empty now, just honest. I folded the paper again and placed it beside the envelope. For a moment, I stood there letting everything settle into place. Not the way it had been, the way it was now, and the way it would be moving forward. He came back a week later, not with urgency this time, not with explanations already lined up. Just a quiet knock. I was in the kitchen when I heard it, the late afternoon light stretching across the counter in a way that felt softer than it had the week before. I didn't rush. I finished rinsing the cup in my hand, dried it, set it back where it belonged. Then I walked to the door and opened it. Daniel stood there alone. No Rachel, no Chloe. His shoulders were slightly forward, hands tucked into his coat pockets, like he wasn't sure what to do with them. For a moment he didn't speak. Neither did I. "Hi," he said. "Hi." It was a simple exchange, but it didn't feel like one we'd had in a long time. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around the house like he was noticing things he hadn't paid attention to before. The space hadn't changed, but something in the way he moved through it had. We stopped in the living room, the same place where everything had shifted days earlier. "I've been thinking," he said. I didn't interrupt. About everything he added, the trip, the money, what I said, what I didn't say. He looked down briefly, then back at me. I didn't really think about how it felt to you," he said. "I thought I was helping, or at least not hurting anything." I held his gaze. "It wasn't just how it felt," I said quietly. "It's what it was." He nodded. "I see that now." There was a pause, not heavy, just honest. "I should have told you," he said, "about changing the trip, about Hawaii, about using your account. Yes, and I shouldn't have assumed it didn't matter," he continued. "I got used to stepping in, handling things, making decisions when you needed it. I know. And somewhere along the way, I stopped checking if you still did, and I let you." The room went still, because that was the part that mattered. "I'm sorry," he said. He didn't rush it, didn't soften it, didn't add anything to make it easier to accept. He just said it. For a moment, I let the words sit there. I didn't need to test them. I could hear the difference. "I believe you," I said. Something in his expression shifted, small but real. "And I'm glad you came back to say it." He nodded, a quiet exhale leaving him. "Does that mean he started?" "No." The word wasn't sharp, just clear. "I'm not going back to how things were," I said. He looked at me, not surprised exactly, but still affected. "I didn't expect everything to just reset," he said. "Good. Because it couldn't, not after everything that had been made visible. I've made changes," I continued, "to my accounts, to the house." He nodded slowly. "I figured, and I'm keeping them that way." Another pause. "Okay," he said. It wasn't easy for him, but he said it anyway. "I still want you in my life," I added, "but not in the same way." He let out a breath, almost like he'd been holding it. "That's fair." We stood there for a moment longer, not trying to fix anything, just standing in what was left. I brought something, he said, reaching into his pocket. He handed me a small envelope. "Chloe made that," he added. "She wanted you to have it." I opened it. A drawing, bright, uneven lines, a house, a small figure holding something that might have been a flower. At the bottom, in careful letters, "I love you, Grandma." My fingers rested lightly on the paper. "She asked if she could come visit," he said. "Just her. Sometimes." I looked up. "That's okay?" He nodded. "I'll tell her." We didn't say much after that. There wasn't anything left that needed to be said. After a few minutes, he moved toward the door. "Thank you," he said. "For coming back," I replied. He gave a small nod, then stepped outside. This time, when the door closed, it didn't feel like something had ended. It felt like something had been placed where it belonged. The days that followed didn't try to become what they used to be. They settled into something quieter. Chloe came by on Saturdays, her small voice filling the kitchen while we baked or drew or did nothing at all. She left crayons on the table and I let them stay. Daniel called sometimes, not to fix things, just to be there. And slowly, carefully, something new took shape. Not the same, but honest. One afternoon, I found myself standing by the window again, the light coming through softer now, warmer against the counter. The bracelet Chloe had made rested loosely around my wrist. I turned it slightly, watching the colors catch the light. I didn't fix it. For a long time, I thought keeping a family together meant holding on to everything exactly the way it was. It doesn't. If you were in my place, would you choose to forgive and build something new, or protect your peace and leave things where they are? Tell me what you would do. And if this story stayed with you, you can show it by liking it, sharing it with someone who might understand, and staying for the next one.